So this process, right? This process started quite a long time ago. What has it meant to you? Going through this process from the beginning of being like, I could never do a talk like this, to all the way being selected and then further refining and then coming to this space. What has that meant for you personally? Whoever wants to go.
Oh, do you want to start, Sarah?
Sure.
Okay,
for me, it was validation and confirmation that my student stories mattered, that they were applicable to not just what I was doing, but that other people wanted to hear them and wanted to celebrate with what was happening in our classroom. So,
you know, for me, we actually found out a year ago, right about now, that we were going to be offered masterclass, and we had this same experience a year ago. But for me, it was being able to work so closely with another state teacher of the year who happens to be here with me. Kim was my partner, and that person to be able to talk through ideas when you're losing your mind about where you're going, trying to find your through line, all of those pieces. She lifted me up in ways I can never repay her for doing. But in the end, it really just felt like a work that you wanted to finish for yourself. It was like getting over the finish line. And it will feel tricky at times if you choose to write one, but just push yourself through to finish it. It really was such an amazing moment for both of us, and I'm speaking for Kim as well at this point, because we spent many hours on the phone over the past year on these TED Talks. But to be able to feel like we had accomplished this together and done something hard and challenging and beautiful.
I would just add that when the opportunity came about, I had a completely different direction. So don't, like, your TED Talk kind of finds you through the process. Just, I started over here and ended on this side. So it is a process, and it was the last thing that we did as a cohort, you know, which was, it felt meaningful, and it was like, this is the gift I'm going to give myself. Because it really, I had no aspirations of, just like Leah, of being here doing it. It was just for myself. Like, you know, Sarah had always said, like, everybody has a talk in them, you know, and I just, for me, is I wanted to find out what that was.
Do you want to go?
Sure. I would say that I realized, is that me?
I think it's true.
I realized how much vulnerability is a part of the process of actually processing your own story. It was actually at the TED Talks that we went to a year ago today that I had made the decision that I would be leaving my high school. And so one of the TED Talks was super emotional, and I actually had to leave. And I tried to sneak out quietly, but one of the others in my cohort came out and asked if she could hug me, and I said yes. And she said, you know, even Dumbledore had to leave Hogwarts. And like, it's lines like that and people like that, and being able to be vulnerable with someone who's helping you process something painful, that you can actually get through it, and that getting through it is a big part of the process.
I think I left during the same TED Talk, and clearly I'm a crier. I went upstairs and I cried for like 20 minutes, and then I just could not pull it together, probably for the rest of the day. And then I thought to myself, how on earth can you get up and share like these pieces of yourself? And you think if you share pieces of yourself, it removes your wholeness, but this is absolutely the opposite of that. You share pieces of yourself and then you become full because you see who relates.
And now I'm going to talk about myself. I will say, because we had talked about this as well last night when we all met, is that when I developed my talk, my partner that I was going through the process with, we both decided that we were going to do a presentation at a conference on what it was just like going through the process of developing a TED Talk, because we had no aspirations to actually give the talk, right? We just thought, we've learned so much about ourselves and about our teaching and about all of the things that you've said, that just going through that process of developing a talk is is almost more, brings about more meaning than the moment that we're here. Others in your cohort had that same experience of going through the development in the process of it. But we've talked too about how we've all given keynotes and presentations. Everyone here has given keynotes, presentations, workshops. Why is this so different? Why is it? Like, why were we all practicing and pacing? And like, what is it about the process of giving a TED-style talk that is just so different?
Well, Jahsha said it. It's because you're giving a piece of yourself as well. And, you know, and I think all of us have points where we were thinking when we were working on this, like, these are really vulnerable things. Sometimes they might bring different emotions and things that you haven't even been able to fully process, things in your life. And part of my own personal experience of writing the TED is that I was putting my heart into that, but also processing through what had been a lot of mixed feelings and hardships with the talk that I gave. And so it really is that. It's because you're giving part of yourself. And maybe you do sometimes in keynotes, but you know, those are typically more structured, like professional development. This is like, you feel like you're giving a gift of opening your soul for someone else to see.
This is a random metaphor because I always speak in random metaphors. So if you get a tattoo, right, you chose that. So when you're given a keynote or you're given a professional development, you are choosing what you would like to share. Like, look at my tattoo. If you also would like one, you can go get one. But when you are giving a talk, you are like, look at my scar. It hasn't really healed all the way, but I'm going to show you and tell you what I remember from this scar. So I felt it was just different that way.
I think also there's like this expectation, because we saw such incredible talks last year, that imposter syndrome kicks in. And so you get selected, you start to prepare, and then you go, oh shoot, mine, you know, no one needs to hear that message. I'm just a runner, you know, like what can I say that people are going to relate to? And so I think a lot of it is that high expectation that TED Talks generally have to connect with the audience. So.
And I think another part about this that deals with choice is when we're talking about reliving our own experiences, right? Other people are a part of those. And when you're doing a TED Talk, you're saying, this experience that I have with you has changed me significantly in such a way that I want to process it out loud for other people to see. And there's that fear that somehow you won't give justice to those people and what they did for you. And it makes it particularly stressful because you want to honor those experiences you've had with other people.
We're good. Yeah. Does anybody have a question for the talkers today? Because I always have more. Okay. Yes.
So when you are learning to prepare a TED Talk, are there certain parameters, rules that they put in there, like it has to, your talk has to have that personal element in it? Like, what are the kind of guidelines?
Well, you definitely have to be careful with your title, because mine was originally Streaking for Joy, but apparently that's frowned upon.
Different TED Talk. Different TED Talk.
TED Talk.
TED Talk after dark.
dark. Yeah. I'm joking. When you go through the master class, all of that is woven into it. So it takes you step by step, and there's homework. So after you learn something, you practice it, you process it, you journal it, and how you come up with it is completely up to you. I was telling my group I made the mistake of, after refining it and having a talk with Sarah, I recorded myself reading it, because I'm used to reading my keynotes. This was like literally the very first time I've ever done one without reading from something. And so I recorded myself and then listened to it every day on my run, and wondered why I completely flopped when I practiced it a few days ago for the first time without notes. I'm not an auditory learner. So here I was listening to something, and I'm a terrible listener at times, asked my husband. I think that's how we somehow ended up with 6 kids. But I had to print it with different sections and different colors because I'm visual, and then I had to add graphics. So the advice we were given from our friend Mark, the Utah Teacher of the Year, who's a theater teacher, was to tell your story. Map out the parts of your story, and when you get to that part, tell it. It's your story. You're not going to forget that part. And so that's what I did, and that's how I was able to do that, was using that advice.
I so feel too that there are no rules. There is like one major one, which is you need to have a theme, which they call a through line. And that can be really hard to figure out how you're crafting that. But, you know, your writing can just come from where you are. And it doesn't have to be like this piece of yourself. I mean, I think we saw many of these had those elements. We are a very emotional cohort overall. It's just like emotional everywhere, every place. But, you know, it can be whatever is in your heart and your desire to want to share with the world.
I'd like to add. So one of the things is when I started, I felt like we listened to some very emotional TED Talks last year, but then Sarah reminded me that actually only 2 of them were really emotional, and some were about your practice as an educator. And so I had this pressure of like, it needs to be really emotional.
Gotta make
you
them
know,
cry.
it needs to be from my, you know, but then as I was going along, I realized I just want to share something that I'm passionate about, right? So I guess don't go in with these expectations of like it needs to be a certain way. Is, you know, just try, just start writing. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's an interesting point, is that we oftentimes think like TED Talks, I will be moved to tears, right? Like I have to, or was it a successful TED Talk, right? But really, some of the ones that we're most engaged with are funny, or they're informative, or they spark something within us that we're like, wow, I never thought of it that way before. We were joking, of course, last night about like the TED Talks that like all teachers watch, right? That like every professional development, like will always start with the same ones, right? They're the ones that stick with us, that we remember, that we're forced to watch every year. But like they still move us, right? And you're right, like they're not always, the goal isn't always, I will make everyone else and myself cry. It's just, sometimes they hit in a place from those personal stories that bring those emotions about for us. So, you two obviously work together, but the process of developing talks with someone else, I mean, you two can speak to that more than anyone else, but again, that is also very different than the keynotes and things that we develop. Because normally you're like, I'm doing this alone, I'm doing it the night before, of course I'm gonna give it. I'm pulling slides together. What was it like developing these talks together?
I think it was just that Kim and I were sounding boards for each other, you know, and we would go through classes or things, but it wasn't necessarily the class, it was the reflection and thinking after that. And sometimes that would take a few weeks of just kind of mulling about it in your brain. And a lot of it was just like, is this crazy? Is this good? Do you think this works? You know, and just like kind of having another person to hear you other than just your own internal dialogue of that process. But, you know, it also helped that Kim and I were on the same level of commitment of what we wanted to do and the direction for it. And so we really, I mean, I'm speaking for myself here, I really came to rely on her listening ear and her ability to kind of talk me through some things as I was working through them.
And I actually started with a different partner.
Yes, I did too.
I think it was me.
No,
Actually, it was somebody else.
Okay.
Oh, okay. We're all good here.
But they had theirs done like the first week. And I felt really, it was hard to have that, like, I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing. And they're like, oh, well, I'm already done with it. So that's when I was texting Leah and I was, wow, his is already done. I don't know what to do. And then, you know, we started to build that relationship. So also make sure that it's okay to find people. You could have 3 partners, you know, like just the people that will be there to listen. And my first partner also was there to listen, but I just felt like, well, you've already finished yours, and it just, you know.
I think, oh, yes, question.
I guess it's along the lines of like how, I guess it's a 2-part question. Like what was the length of your process of creating it? And then when did you know you were ready? I think that's part
What
of my
time is it?
problem. That's part of my problem. Is like, when am I ready? When am I ever ready?
You won't be. No.
It's a joke. Every single time that I've said it, it is a completely different talk. Completely different.
The one she did in practice today versus the one she gave to you, through lines were there, ideas were there, but they were different.
Yeah. And my brain doesn't work that way. So like I can connect one piece and then I'm like, oh, and this part too. And it's written down, but because I could never read it or just listen to it, none of that worked for me. When are you ready? If you are, we're in a room full of overachievers, you will go through the entire TED Ed thing in maybe less than a week. But if you are an overachiever, you will perseverate on each part and say, no, this doesn't make sense. I'm doing a whole different one now. And when are you ready? 5 seconds before, and then when it comes out, you're like, okay, thanks. That was new. That was it. All right, I like that.
So my buddy, love his heart, wasn't the most there. Love him. That's why I chose him as a buddy. So when I was giving the talk, I was just in my office alone, and I was like, this feels stupid. So I had a hedgehog stuffed animal, so I put it in front of me and started doing the talk to it, because that's not stupid. So the funny thing is, I think the whole process of having a buddy is really about forcing yourself to have opportunities to experience this again, because you are re-experiencing whatever you're trying to process for people every time. So I would give the talk to the hedgehog, and I would sense the hedgehog sneering, like that's not a good line.
Side eye.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I would literally stop and think, really, you didn't like that? So I would say, once the hedgehog isn't giving you face anymore, you're ready. Which really means once you've done it once and you're like, I like this. Whether it's a hedgehog telling you or someone else, that's when I think.
I think you have like, I don't know, it's almost a year, right, to go through everything. So I think once you have finalized it and you have rehearsed it with either a buddy, and for me, my buddy wasn't in my cohort. I sent it to multiple people in my district that I collaborate with. So people at the district level, people at my school. I think my mom has, I don't think she ever listened to it yet, but that's okay. She's got 7 kids, she knows. But I think the days leading up to this, it evolved every day, just slightly, a little bit. I would say it out loud and I go, ooh, and then like Jahsha, I'd be like, oh, what did I just say? Because that one was really good, but it's not written down because I'm ad-libbing. So it beautifully comes together when you're here because, and we said this to each other, nobody knows what we already wrote. So when we skip a part, which some of us did, and no, you're not supposed to tell them. When you skip a part or you ad-lib or you gloss over or you change it, nobody is any wiser to that. So whatever comes out is what was meant to come out. The universe wants you to succeed, and you will when you get up there.
I think as well, all of our talks, though had the same themes and through lines, we are different today than they were in January when we presented them to our cohort. And so I see my TED as continually evolving. That, you know, like what I presented today was the best of myself in that moment with what I created. And if I were to do this 6 months down the road, it might look somewhat different. And so I've seen it over this entire process as the thing I am nurturing in my mind and continuing to grow and learn from the process, the revision process. And, you know, getting to do it here today was just beyond any expectation I had when I filmed mine 3 days before it was due in my classroom and sent it off into the world and said, I finished, yay. I did this for myself. And so I think that piece of it is, I don't think it's ever fully done. I think it just will continue to evolve over time.
Yeah. My question is, how arduous is this? Like, did everyone in the cohort start and then you guys would find who made it this far?
A lot of people.
It was a race.
Survival of the fittest.
Who do I have to outrun to make it to the finish line?
No, I'm just curious how that works. Yeah.
I think, I don't want to speak for everybody, I think a lot of people had good intentions, but life, you are teachers of the year in your state, and your obligations and your duties and personal things and all that. And so 12 of us completed from start to finish, and we showcased those in a virtual event in January. But I know there were many that still say, I'm working on my TED Talk, that there wasn't a deadline to do it. It just, I mean, for this particular piece, I guess there was a deadline if you were, but I don't think any of us submitted thinking like, we're coming to DC to present these, you know. But there are many in our cohort that are still like, I'm working on this, I'm writing this for myself. And
Someone said it earlier, I think it was Leah. It is that, exactly that. It is like, I've done all of this wonderful thing. How do I now voice what I need to say? And then the email comes out like, it is due on this day. And you're like, okay, record. And then that's exactly what it is. And I think everyone had the intention to do that, and some are still working, but it was really, at this moment, let me give what I have, because it feels like almost like a graduation for yourself, right?
And I will say that even for my year, which was one of the first years we did a showcase of any kind with that, is that there were people that then used the talks they had developed to then give TEDx talks within their states or in their areas. So it's like, even though this type of experience didn't happen for them in that moment, they were able still to use that learning far beyond, right? Did you have a question? No, you're just stretching there. Yeah. Well, part of that is, I guess, a question for me too, is have any of you given these talks before or feel like giving them again?
I'll give it again if I can read from, if I can read it.
Yeah.
I have a speaking engagement coming up, and I'm supposed to be speaking about focusing on students' abilities, right, and avoiding a deficit-based mindset. So I'm trying to figure out, how do I say, and putting a full pyramid up is an asset. I just, I'm going to finagle that. But I'm thinking there are pieces of it that I will use. But I still, as you said, want to go through it and see if I can, you know, improve it.
I think for all of us, it was the first time we gave it in any capacity to a group of people today. So maybe Willie.
The Gay Straight Alliance of a small liberal arts college in Kentucky invited me to come speak to them this week, and a lot of my keynotes are fairly negative in that their goal is to be instructive for straight people. So there's a lot of statistics that I don't want to bog down kids in a GSA with. So I go into this space where we're giving the talk, but everyone's on beanbags, and they're like lying on their backs and looking like into the sky, and like I'm like, oh my gosh, this is not the space to do this. So I'm like on a beanbag, barely keeping my balance, and I'm trying to give this talk, but I can't see anyone's face because they're on beanbags. So I was very nervous that I would relive the beanbag experience with you all, but I did not. Thank you for emoting with your faces.
This is far from the beanbag experience. Yeah.
But I recommend it.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. Anybody else out there? The burning question. Yes.
When it comes to like the big idea or the through line, just for
For me, my initial story about Mrs. Henderson was where my first calling was to start, but I was really floundering for a while about where that was going. And Sarah Brown-Wessling, who, as you probably already know, is like one of the most amazing human beings on this planet, she did a one-on-one with me in November, and I was really struggling. And I had just in my mind just been like worrying around my Randall story and that. I'm like, are these connected? Does this make sense? Am I just like crazy that these can be connected? And I talked to her and she's like, yes, they are. Even that simply, like that, yes, I'm not crazy piece. So for me, it was the story. But then when I initially finished, I felt my TED was about me. That it was me writing out this thing for myself. And what I realized is that I could evolve it into something that was for everyone. And I think, you just have to trust that process. And whatever makes sense to you, you might have a really great idea or you might have that story. But the nice thing about the time is the fact that you have a lot of time to think about it. I spent countless hours thinking about this. The actual physical time writing it, far less, because it was really in all the work of in my car thinking, in making dinner, on a walk, waking up at 3:30 in the morning thinking about it, just like we all do as educators. And so just trust yourself in the process as you start to hear the ways that they want you to structure it. But in the end, I would say just go with your gut and your heart on what you want to share.
Could I add to that? You bring up a good point, is there's the group that does this process, you have Zooms together, you have opportunities to meet with Sarah, and so it's a really wonderful experience. I would look forward to our Zooms, and everybody would be like, I don't know what we're doing, but it was just another chance to be with your cohort and to, do something for yourself. So just
And something I always tell students when I'm trying to teach literary analysis is to find that feeling you got that you're trying to chase. Like you haven't said it out loud to yourself yet, and usually we're talking about a text. But like, what is an almost thought that's there, but that's pervasive, and how can you write enough to articulate it? And I think for me, I knew that I wanted to talk about this feeling that I had the entirety of the year, that good things were going to happen and I was going to make it, which was such a revelatory emotion for me. And so that actually involved a lot of stuff, a lot of ideas that I could have talked about. And then the second part, once I had my through line, was to say, okay, how can I best process this out loud in a way that will help other people sense it? Because it's not just about sort of what might be emotional or what might be exciting, but how can I tell this story in a way that might get you to take something meaningful away. So whatever your through line ends up being, really think about how you can give to people and make whatever happened to you something that can be a part of their lives in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I think also starting with what's the best part of your current keynotes? What's the part that people resonate with? And for me, it was my correlation to running and teaching. But then after conversation with Sarah, which was just like clicked, she said a keynote is I and me, and a TED Talk is we and us. So I took my keynote and I changed it into community of practice. As teachers, what does this mean? And that made it flow, and it was, from there, it was golden, so.
Thank you. This has been amazing. We have a couple things to talk through before we set you free, but now that you've heard our last two incredible inspirational talks, please do not leave this room without writing them a note on their boards to make sure that we share the love that they're experiencing here for them as well. And thank you all for being such amazing audience today as well. This is awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.